The MLB just made a huge announcement to reinstate 17 players that received lifetime bans. This comes after years of debate on what the term lifetime ban even actually means. And among those that will now become eligible are Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson. But what does this mean moving forward, and when will these players get into the Hall of Fame? Let's talk about it. Every once in a while, there comes a new story in the baseball world that sends shockwaves across the league. Well, May 13th was one of those days when 17 players had their lifetime bans essentially lifted. The ruling itself is a pretty agreeable one universally. However, those that it benefits is less agreed upon, specifically Pete Rose, but more on him in a second. The official announcement said that deceased players on the ineligible list had never been addressed. Because of this, their eligibility status was never clarified for what happens after they die. The reason this even comes up is because Pete Rose, who received a lifetime ban in 1989, passed away last year in 2024. The question then became, does Rose become eligible for Hall of Fame consideration because he's no longer alive? Well, thanks to the statement from Major League Baseball, they reasoned that because a deceased player no longer poses a threat to the integrity of the game, they are, in effect, unbanned. This ruling not only serves Pete Rose in a positive manner, but 16 other players who had received lifetime bans, where all but one were banned for gambling-related offenses. So what does all of this mean for the newly eligible players moving forward? Well, for those that were good enough to be Hall of Famers, this ruling allows a clear path for their induction. The primary players that will likely have their name called will be Pete Rose, Shoeless Joe Jackson, and Eddie Seacott. They won't become Hall of Famers overnight, however, as they'll have to wait until December 2027 when the Classic Era Committee will vote on players from pre-1980. So, for the next 2 years, we'll just have to sit back and wait. Who knows, maybe GTA 6 will actually be out by then. Now, let's be clear, this ruling doesn't excuse any of the actions that led these players to wind up on the ban list in the first place. For the most part, these players wound up there for a reason. And although I don't condone any of the actions in these players' personal lives, the Baseball Hall of Fame is designed to be a place to tell the story of baseball, specifically the men that played the game the best. So for those that are attempting to make a case for why they still shouldn't enter the Hall of Fame on the sole merit that these men were terrible people, let me introduce you to a few players that are already in the Hall despite their personal shortcomings. Rogers Hornsby, Cap Anson, and Kirby Puckett are all Hall of Famers. These players had illustrious careers, but despite their superb playing, each of these men had their own personal lives called into question. For starters, Rogers Hornsby was often alleged to have been a hard person to work with, both as a teammate and from a managerial perspective. So much so that he was fired from a manager role on 5 separate occasions due to gambling issues, racist remarks, overbearing coaching, and frequent clashes with players. However, despite all of that, Hornsby was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1942 because of his superb playing career. Now over to Cap Anson. He is largely considered baseball's first superstar player and is often credited with helping to popularize the sport. But despite all of that, Anson was a known racist, and to some is called a pioneer of baseball's color barrier. He was a lead factor behind the quote-unquote gentleman's agreement that kept baseball segregated until 1947. And although the time period he came up in had its own racist roots, Anson was arguably overly racist for his time, often refusing to take the field if black players were even involved in any capacity. With all of that said, Anson was still elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1939. Lastly, Kirby Puckett. Widely beloved during his playing career, Puckett's legacy in his post-playing days paint him in a much darker sense. Puckett was accused by his wife of abuse that included death threats, choking, and other physical harm. This was merely a fraction of things to surface in his post-playing career, as he was also accused of sexual misconduct and living a double life, often cheating on his wife. And although these stories came out after he was inducted to the Hall of Fame in 2001, Puckett was never removed despite his personal and off-the-field issues. In fact, none of these men have ever had their Hall of Fame status questioned. Once you're in, you're in. So now becomes the question, do Pete Rose, Shoeless Joe, and Eddie Seacott get in? Personally, I'd like to think yes, especially in the case of Shoeless Joe and Seacott, as their ban was issued on the merit of gambling, which was often contested in the first place. As for Pete Rose, there's never really been a case like his before. We've seen steroid users get passed over due to their involvement in cheating on the game, but Pete's gambling and personal issues are another thing. Pete Rose is the all-time leader in hits and games played. So with that said, aside from Barry Bonds, we've never had an all-time stat leader get passed on for the Hall. Now, one thing we know for sure, Rose never used steroids, but his primary sins, well, they were that he was gambling on games that he was managing, allegations of rape, and sexual misconduct with a minor that were tied to his name. A lifetime ban was absolutely justified. However, now that he is deceased, and with the ruling from Major League Baseball, Rose has the door open for his Hall of Fame induction. And like I said, I don't condone any of the actions from those previously mentioned, but the Baseball Hall of Fame is a place designed to tell stories of the men that played the game at the highest level. Rose, Jackson, and Seacott are among those. Now, I'll never be one to tell someone that their opinion is wrong or invalid. So if you believe otherwise, I completely respect that. But I personally think that if we're going to assign Hall of Fame honors to only the good guys of the game, then we're talking about a different Hall of Fame. There's cheaters, racists, sexual abusers, and much more in the Hall. Do I support that? No. But were they great at the game they played? Absolutely. To assign morality to the Hall of Fame is a slippery slope, because if you want to play the morality game, then we need to reassess the members that already exist, that of which simply won't happen. So that I say, let's elect them into the Baseball Hall of Fame, but not ignore their darker side either. Both things can exist at the same time. But until December 2027 comes around, the debate will live on. And in the most unexpected sort of way, the new ruling allows me to say, well, that's baseball for you.